Begin with reading from Psalm 103, a text that clearly is on my mind this morning and ought to be constantly on all of our minds because of the wonderful things it tells us about the heart of our God toward us as people. Psalm 103, verses 8 to 14. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and plenteous in mercy. He will not always chide, neither will he keep his anger forever. He hath not dealt with us after our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heaven is above the earth, so great is his mercy toward them that fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. Like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. For he knoweth our frame, he remembereth that we are dust. We'll turn now to Mark 6, and as it's a long chapter, it seemed best to split it up. So we'll read just 1 to 29. You recall in Mark 5, Christ was, as he commands us to be, full of good works, always doing good, and by his almighty power, as the God-man, doing miracles of healing. And now we continue and hear some of his teaching, and we hear about John the Baptist and his martyrdom. 1 to 29. And he went out from thence and came into his own country, and his disciples follow him. And when the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, From whence hath this man these things? And what wisdom is that which is given unto him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joses and of Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him. But Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went round about the villages teaching. And he called unto him the 12, and began to send them forth by two and two, and gave them power over unclean spirits, and commanded them that they should take nothing for their journey, save a staff only, no scrip, no bread, no money in their purse, but be shod with sandals, and not put on 2 coats. And he said unto them, In what place soever ye enter into an house, there abide till ye depart from that place. And whosoever shall not receive you nor hear you, when ye depart thence, shake off the dust under your feet for a testimony against them. Verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. And they went out and preached that men should repent. And they cast out many devils, and anointed with oil many that were sick, and healed them. And King Herod heard of him, for his name was spread abroad. And he said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Others said that it is Elias, and others said that it is a prophet, or as one of the prophets. But when Herod heard thereof, he said, It is John, whom I beheaded. He is risen from the dead. For Herod himself had sent forth and laid hold upon John, and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. For John had said unto Herod, It is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Therefore Herodias had a quarrel against him, and would have killed him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and unholy, and observed him, and when he heard him, he did many things, and heard him gladly. And when a convenient day was come, that Herod on his birthday made a supper to his lords, high captains, and chief estates of Galilee, and when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced, and pleased Herod, and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, Ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee. And he sware unto her, Whatsoever thou shalt ask of me, I will give it thee unto the half of my kingdom. And she went forth and said unto her mother, What shall I ask? And she said, The head of John the Baptist. And she came in straightway with haste unto the king, and asked, saying, I will that thou give me by and by in a charger the head of John the Baptist. And the king was exceeding sorry, yet for his oath's sake, and for their sakes which sat with him, he would not reject her. And immediately the king sent an executioner, and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head in a charger, and gave it to the damsel. And the damsel gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse, and laid it in a tomb. There are some severe warnings for us in this chapter. We'll hear them. One is that familiarity often breeds contempt, and this has spiritual ramifications. Christ says in verse 4, a prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house. This is a warning to you that you would not despise your own flesh because they happen to be more holy than you. Envy can be particularly bad at home, but it has no place in the Christian life. If your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters outdo you in holiness, I would say it's not a competition, but it is good to compete in these things. But you ought not hate them for it. But this is a severe temptation. It's also a reality of life in which many of us will find the worst opposition will come from our own flesh and blood in spiritual matters. That Christ warned us in advance of that should help you not to be surprised, and should help you, therefore, fight these troubles. Christ was willing to endure the hatred of his own people that he grew up with, went to school with, so to speak. And he said, this is how it happens. They dishonor the prophets they're familiar with. Then he sends them out into this area, and he says, as we've read before, it shall be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment when they have to shake off the dust of their feet. And this also is a warning that you should not be so familiar with the gospel that it becomes something to be rejected. We should be familiar as possible with it, but beware that your familiarity with the things of God and with the people of God does not make you reject it. God will have all that familiarity witness against you, and it will be better for Sodom than for you on that last day. And finally, at the warning of Herod. Herod is a great challenge, but it opens our eyes to the reality of how wickedness works. Herod desires his brother's wife. As far as I understand the story, his brother and his wife got divorced. He wasn't marrying his brother's wife while she was technically the brother's wife, but it was still wrong. This is opposed by the book of Leviticus, which we take, according to our confession of faith, as binding for today, because it tells us the relations which are properly understood as incest, and that has not changed. There's nothing about the difference between us and Israel that has made those things change. It's still wrong to marry your brother's wife, even if your brother is dead or they are divorced. It was not right. Some would find this too serious of a point of righteousness, and the American church actually decided to amend the confession on this point and to remove it from our confession of faith. I don't think for the better. So take care there, but note the more important thing. John is not afraid on what some consider to be a small point of righteousness to risk his life in the defense of it. He was a prudent man. He understood what he was asking for when he, it seems right to Herod's face, said, "You may not have her." And what he could have feared did happen. He was killed. And notice the circumstances of his death. It involved a party at which no doubt there was plenty of drinking. There was dancing, no doubt suggestive by this young girl. She was the daughter of this woman that he ought not to have had. How just and fitting that this would come about, that this burden of this murder would be on Herod's conscience because of the family that he married. And in this murder, he shows what so many wicked men do, a terrible cowardice. He is prompted by a little girl and by his wife to commit an extraordinary evil against his own conscience. He knows that he shouldn't do this. He regrets it after telling them, giving them this blank check to ask whatever they wanted. He ought to have known her character. And instead of realizing that he'd sinned and refusing to sin because a promise to sin must not be kept, he yields for his oath's sake. And this tells you about wicked men. It's a warning to your own heart. They will abuse even religion to give themselves an excuse to sin. Well, I made an oath to God. I guess I have to keep it. You made an oath to sin to God? We don't keep oaths to sin. We're never allowed to sin, even by our own religion. And yet, he keeps it, and for their sakes that were with him. The Spirit telling us he was a man-pleaser and couldn't think that he would displease anyone else. The same man who refused to be displeased himself by John the Baptist and so put him in prison. He lives for others' pleasure. It's a very sad thing, and it brings to mind what one preacher colorfully imagined. If Herod in hell, rather, not in heaven. Herod in hell forever with the charger with John the Baptist's head in his hands, never able to get it out, always there staring up at him, reminding him of his enormous evil that he will never be able to expiate and always have to be punished for forever. This is what the end of such cowardly sinfulness brings. Take heed, my friends. Let's turn now, instead of to Titus 1, to the Old Testament, 1 Samuel. And I'll read to you a few verses from each in chapter 2 and 3. I chose this because it fits very well with our theme, which is the blamelessness required of an elder, especially as a husband and a father. And we have here, I don't think, a clearer example, except besides David, of a man in leadership by God's appointment who has made himself vile in failing in that leadership to lead the first ones he ought to have led, his own children. So we'll see in chapter 2 about his sons and about what Samuel does say to him. And we'll read in chapter 3 of the judgment upon him for what he didn't do. Read verses 12 to 36 of chapter 2. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial, or Belial, means worthlessness. They knew not the Lord. And the priest's custom was the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. And he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and all that the flesh hook brought up the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. And before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. And if any man said unto him, Let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth, then he would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. You recall that the fat belonged to the Lord, not the priests. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for the men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat, and brought it to him from year to year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife, and said, The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went unto their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived, and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? for I hear of your evil doings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. And the child Samuel grew on, and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. Now I read in chapter 3, verses 11 to 19. You recall Samuel has heard the voice of God. He didn't know it was God's voice. Eli, after being awoken a few times, says it's the Lord. And here now the Lord is speaking to him. And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of every one that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I also will make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever, for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. And Samuel lay until the morning, and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, Here am I. And he said, What is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. And Samuel told him every whit, and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good. We turn now to Titus chapter 1. Our text is verse 6. I'll read verse 5 as a reminder. For this cause I left thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I had appointed thee. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. Last time we considered the need in the church for the sake of order and especially of edification for elders. The ruling office in the church, called in 1 Corinthians 11:28 or 12:28, governments. An office exercised by both ruling elders and ministers, whom we call, on the basis of 1 Timothy 5:17, sometimes teaching elders. It should be evident from the very nature of the office and its weighty duties that it cannot be entrusted just to any person. Rather, our text is clear, if any be blameless. We'll take time in this portion on the qualifications, which extends through verse 9. And then we'll take time after that on the major motivating reasons in verses 10 to 16. That is the presence of so many, we could call them false elders, and otherwise evil men who would oppose true elders and would destroy them or draw them away if they were not properly qualified. And thus the weight of our text, verse 6. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. Our text gives three qualifications, one general and two specific. So first, the general qualification, that is blamelessness. If any be blameless. This shows two things. First, blamelessness itself. What we mean here is not sinlessness. If the elder was required to be sinless, there'd be no elders. Christ would have to rule his church directly, but he's not chosen to do that. Rather, what's required is sincerity, a commitment with integrity to live a godly life. And not just a life suitable to a Christian profession that every Christian must live. And indeed, The elder must be, first and foremost, a Christian, but a level of blamelessness that is fitting to the ruling office that this elder will hold, in which he is not only one who will be judged by God, but who will be judged in addition as a model for others. That's what Titus is told to be in chapter 2, verse 7. Blamelessness means, we could say, stainlessness. He has no blotches on his character or life that would bring reproach upon himself, upon the ministry, and therefore upon Christ and the church. He must be blameless. The second thing that it tells us is its rarity in how this qualification is given. If any be blameless. The subjunctive verb there showing a possibility that there might be none. If any be blameless. It is a rarity to find an upright man. Proverbs 20, verse 6 says, most men will proclaim everyone his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find? It's very rare, and Paul recognizes that, and he's insisting only this rare kind can be an elder. Very few men are qualified for the office naturally. They just don't have the natural ability to rule over others. They either don't have their life together as they ought, they're barely ruling their own self or their own household. They may not have the ability or aptness to teach that we'll talk about later. But as few are qualified naturally for this office, even fewer of those are qualified spiritually. Indeed, there are many elders in the church who are men's men, but who are not God's men. And that is what he's insisting on here as much more important than any other natural qualification. And this is why the entrance to this office requires careful inspection, testing, and training. I turn back to 1 Timothy chapter 3, which will be a continual parallel with here because Paul says the same sort of things at greater length. In verse 6, he says of the elder candidate, not a novice, not a neophyte, not new to this whole thing, especially to Christianity itself. He can't be a new convert, lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. That would be against the very term elder, which means older man. He has to be like that, at least spiritually. But then also as regards the deacons, it's said of them in verse 10, let these also first be proved, and then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. And we can reason if that's true for the diaconate, how much more for the elder because of its greater importance and weightiness in the church. There's a time of testing. All of your elders have undergone such testing and proving. We wouldn't have had it any other way in this church, and we will require it of any future officers here. So under blamelessness, the general qualification, we consider the blamelessness itself and then the rarity of it. Now, the second thing is these specific requirements that follow. These, we could say, are illustrations of blamelessness. The list that follows is not totally exhaustive, but it gives enough to make it clear what Paul does mean by blamelessness. And so we consider two specifics today. The first is purity, and that in marriage. It says, if any be blameless, the husband of one wife, faithful to one woman. Now, I differ with some. It's a rarity, but there are some who say this absolutely requires that an elder be married. And I think the example of the Apostle Paul is a clear exception to that, and we are open to exceptions otherwise. But rather, as I said, it's an illustration of this general blamelessness, assuming the qualification of sex, that is, he must be male. I wish we didn't have to retread this ground. It should be obvious. But in our age, we need to say it. 1 Timothy 2:12 says it is a shameful thing for the woman to teach in church. And Paul in 1 Corinthians 14 says that women should be silent in the churches, for it is a shame for them to speak. And for those reasons, all the more, the office of teaching and speaking in the church is closed to women. No female elders. So assuming that all elders are men, and also assuming the usual age and condition of a man who could be considered for an elder. Namely, he's old enough to be married and he's stable enough to have a wife and children. That is normal, though not strictly required. And so Paul deals with just the normal circumstance. And regarding the marriage of such a man, there are a few things that we can lay out specifically that this phrase, the husband of one wife, means. First, it means no undue delay of marriage. If he's single for God's sake and for the kingdom, great. But he may not put off getting married if he needs it, because it's better to be married than to burn, as Paul explains in 1 Corinthians 7. It means also a scourge in our age, no pornography or self-pollution. I speak carefully, but you know what I mean. And this is a scourge, as I said, in our age. Third, no fornication or adultery. He can't be with women who are not his wife, whether he's married or not. This is more specific to this phrase, the husband of one wife. He must be faithful. But also, this phrase clearly means no polygamy. He can't be married to more than one woman at once. And I would remind you of the harm that such polygamy brought to the patriarchs and how difficult it made them to rule their own houses, not to mention God's church. Think of also David and Solomon, especially Solomon. David, though, setting the example that Solomon followed to the nth degree of taking more than one wife. It was a disaster in the home and in the nation, and it would be a disaster in the church. We ought not need to mention other perversions as well, but again, we do. We certainly shouldn't have to mention those men who claim to be, in their words, gay but celibate. Sodomites in heart. Paul condemns such men in Romans 1, 26-27, saying they've been given up to vile affections, burning in their lust one toward another. This is well before they even committing any acts, though they often do that next. Such men are not only disqualified, but this is so disgusting and wrong that we should say, all who think that anyone could be an elder who is perverted in such a way is also disqualified from the eldership. How could such disgusting men even approach the holy office in Christ's church? It's surprising that for the toleration of such madness, God has not already totally destroyed the Presbyterian Church in America. I add under this heading of the husband of one wife that this means faithfulness in marriage, but not just regarding the marriage bed, but in all the duties of marriage. This man must evidently be one who, according to Ephesians 5, loves his wife as Christ loved the church. And especially in our age, we must insist that means he rules his wife as Christ rules the church. A contentious and angry woman, as Proverbs 21:19 calls her, ruins both households and churches, especially when she is the wife of an elder. And as with unruly children, an unruly wife is usually a proof that the man himself is not blameless. And that leads us to the second specific qualification. Not just that he must be the husband of one wife, but second, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. I'll need to take special care here in the explanation and then in the application. So I beg your patience and attention, but this is very important. The man must rule in his home over his children as a sort of proving ground of his ability to rule the church. For as Paul says, again, 1 Timothy 3, so wisely in verse 5, for if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? This logic is unassailable. If you can't take care of the little church, or the part of the church that's the most important to you, why would you take care of the rest of the church? It doesn't make any sense. First, I want to note the assumption here, and it's worth laying out. Paul doesn't say it, but we need to. That the proof of the man's own blamelessness is in his children's behavior. That's assumed. Otherwise, he couldn't say what he said. And that's clear in 1 Timothy 3:4. One that, he puts it plainly, ruleth his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. It's also clear that when it comes to the children's own faithfulness, that there are means God has established to that end, which naturally then the man must be using. Means such as what we heard in Ephesians 6:4, that he must admonish and teach his own children in the ways of God. Or in Proverbs chapter 23, verses 13 and 14. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. And I note especially Proverbs 22, verse 6. You likely know this one. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. These things are assumed in what Paul's saying. He speaks of the children's behavior, assuming that that has everything to do with the father and his own blameless rule in the household. Now, immediately people begin to ask, well, are there exceptions? Can a man be a blameless elder who has children that are not blameless? Well, I'd say first, yes, by the very nature of the case, for parents cannot regenerate their children. Nor, when they serve as means in their conversion and sanctification as they ought, can they take credit for the power of those graces, because that power comes from God. The rod, properly speaking, does not save any child, though God may bless it as a means to do so, and he speaks that way to encourage us to seek that blessing in the use of the means. Rather, it's by sovereign saving grace, rooted in eternal election, which is a secret thing that no parent can affect or change. Let me be clear. This text is not asserting some promise that all children of every believing parent are certainly elect and will be saved. God does not say that in the Word. And if I told you he said it, then I would set you up for massive disappointment with God. And I would not do that. However, though I need to make that qualification, my judgment as a minister is that today people are far too quick to ask about exceptions and to answer, yes, there are exceptions. That's not the thrust of our text. Practically, there are far fewer men who are exceptions than who are asserted to be exceptions. Certainly, as concerns the behavior of their young children who are daily under their care in the home. We'll have more on that soon. But I bring here the warning of Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things, whether my child's elect, whether he'll be converted one day, those things belong to the Lord. But the things that are revealed, namely teach, instruct, discipline, admonish, trust God, pray, those things belong to you, to us and to our children. And those are the things right before us. And they matter. And there is a reasonable assessment of our use of them by their fruitfulness or lack thereof. If there are to be exceptions, they must be shown to be exceptions by an otherwise blameless parenting, by faithfulness in disciplining the children that do go astray, even to the form of extreme discipline, a sort of family excommunication together with the discipline of the church, and a sincere searching of the heart on the part of such parents, a sincere repentance from parental failures, and a consistent faithfulness in other children in the home with the fruit that should be expected from it. That's what we look for when we're considering exceptions. But my judgment is that there are far fewer exceptions than are made out to be. So first, the assumption. Having said that, let's go to what he says regarding the character of these children, that they, like their father, must show a sort of blamelessness. In two respects, he says. First, that they must be faithful children. Faithfulness is what's being presented. First, a faithfulness to their parents. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And that's fitting to what's said about the wife, and we considered her already. But also and especially to God, at least in outward things, in a general, profession of faith. This word faithful could be translated, and is in some Bibles, as believing or believers. I think faithful seems better to fit the second half, what we'll see in a moment. But it cannot be indifferent to the question of faith, because there is no way to be faithful, at least to God, without some measure of faith. The text here is not indifferent to whether our children profess faith at all. They must have, according to their age and station, some outward profession of faith and piety. Think about the opposite. A child, especially a young one, who professes atheism, Romanism, liberalism, who rejects the catechism that his parents try to teach him, who refuses to be in family worship, refuses to do personal prayer or Bible reading, while he's in the home, refuses even to go to church, is a shame to his parents, and a likely, more than likely, revelation of the father's own sin and disqualification from office. So faithfulness to parents and to God. The second thing is obedience. As he says, in the negative, not accused of riot or unruly. This fills in, and against objections and exceptions and evasions, what faithfulness means. First, they must not be accused of riot. They can't have the stain or mark of loose living that's so obvious that they are publicly accused of it. This usually also is disqualifying, and I read a clear example from 1 Samuel of Eli. His sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who were polluting the offerings of the Lord for their own selfish gain, and who were sleeping with the women who came to church. What a stain. This was disqualifying to Samuel. It's exactly what God said. He punished in a divine way. And he said what he would do. And in chapter 4, he did it. We read 3:13. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever, for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile. And note this, it's not mainly their vileness that is the problem. It's that it's Samuel's fault. And he restrained them not. This resulted in his own death, the death of his sons, the death of other members of his family and many others in Israel, and the extermination of his entire posterity. You will understand why God is so serious about this when you think about how common it is that the pastor's kid, the PK, is an occasion for enemies to boast against Christianity. They become a byword to the church's great shame and to the harm of many souls. That's why God takes this so seriously. Not accused of riot. The second thing is not unruly. This is nearly a synonym, but it tells us a little more. I need here to correct the English Standard Version, which says open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, whether by paraphrase or, God forbid it, by mistake in reading the Greek. Insubordination is not here. Insubordinate is correct, or in our terms, unruly. It's describing the children, not something they're accused of. This gets us more to the issue. It doesn't matter, second, whether or not anyone accuses them of it. If they are, it's a problem. Unruly. A literal translation, either way you describe it, better honors the word of God. It's one reason we read the King James Bible. And this bears noting for all parents. Unruly children are a shame. If you are parents, if you're going to be parents, if you're going to be grandparents, please keep this in mind. You have seen this before. You know what I'm talking about. You've been to the grocery store, and perhaps it was you, but perhaps it was someone else. You see a child throwing a temper tantrum about something that he wanted and can't get. And the whole store knows that child's displeasure. Whether it was you or another parent, the right thing for that parent to do is immediately to leave in shame, because this is a major problem. It should be an occasion to search the parent's heart and to seek immediate and deep repentance and to take emergency measures that something like that would not happen again. You might call such measures at home boot camp, or as some families have said, the reign of terror. But whatever you do, it can't happen again. Otherwise, you threaten their temporal and eternal ruin and your own permanent shame. The child left to himself is a shame to his mother. Proverbs 29:15 says, and accordingly to our present purpose, such unruliness is a disqualification of the father from church office. Let's sum up all we've learned. The elder must be blameless, including in his marriage and his parenting. Again, the elder must be blameless in his marriage and in his parenting. Now, often I go here to prove more fully this doctrine, but I took time already in the explanation to prove these things, so we should move right to application now. And I have 3 categories of application for 3 different groups, all represented here. The first application is for all husbands. I would not have you lose a good opportunity just because these things were written for elders. They're for you too. You must flee impurity. I recommend for your frequent rereading Proverbs 5-7. Stern warnings against the harlot, the strange woman who will destroy you, your marriage, your life, your soul. And you need to let these warnings settle into you deeply, not only to change your outward life, but to change your very eyes and thoughts. Making a covenant with Job, saying, I have made a covenant with mine eyes. How can I think upon a maid, a young girl that's not my wife? I appeal to you men, knowing the flesh and all the temptations of this age. If you need help in this, and especially if you have failed, please talk to your elders. Do not let these wounds go untreated. By grace, we are blameless, and we believe by grace you can be too, and we want to help you. Do not let something like this erupt into outright adultery, which would ruin your marriage, your job, your family, your reputation, and our church. Take heed, men. Flee impurity. Second, positively love your wife. Oh, men, do not neglect this woman whom God has given you to be one flesh with. Be a one-woman man in all the fullness of that sense. Be her husband, her caretaker, her leader, the one who loves her. And I renew my warning given now a few times in a few sermons. Never permit your wife to rule you or our church, even in subtle ways, by a grumbling spirit, by indiscretion, by an excessive expression of her own opinions. Preventing this is one way that you care for her. So please do so. Love your wife. Thus, for husbands and future husbands, take note yourself. The second group that I address is all parents here, elders or not, man or women, fathers and mothers. And I am not ashamed to take time here. Please listen. This is a matter of eternal life and death for your children and even for you. Let's be clear of what this text is clear about. First, your children must obey you. They have no choice in the matter, and neither do you. You must make them obey you. You must require your children to be, in the term of our text, faithful, including and especially in their piety. Insist they read their Bibles, that they pray, they recite their catechism, memorize their psalter, attend family worship, attend public worship, keep the Sabbath, even and especially when they're older and their resistance to these things might be all the stronger. It doesn't matter. When they push harder, you must push back harder. It must be an inflexible rule in your household that as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. No choice in the matter. God is serious about this, and thus, men, I am too, and women. Require your children to be faithful. And then, as the negative in our text says, forbid them to be riotous and unruly, and especially for that riot and unruliness to be seen in public and to extend to public accusation on your character and on the church. I mentioned the grocery store, but it goes deeper than that. These things can be much more subtle and yet no less deadly. It shows in speech to parents, or even lack of speech, lack of respectful addresses to parents and other adults. In gestures, even looks on the face. If you're an experienced parent, you know what I'm speaking of. In home or in church, when I, as a minister, hear a sassy word, when I see a rebellious look, though I endeavor to be patient, I'm troubled because I see in my mind's eye the ruin of that child's soul. I see the ruin of the parent's reputation, of the peace of the church, of the stability of our nation itself, because these children are its future. I see generations of the just curse of God who visits the father's sins on the children to the third and the fourth generation of them that hate him. And having had this vision, I plead with you, dear people, pull out those weeds while they are small, before they grow up into a plant that will choke every good thing. I want to ask you a question right now. I want you parents to be very honest with God. If you don't tell me the answer, you must tell God and he'll know it. Are your children respectful and obedient? If the answer is no, then your work starts today. And it must not end until you can say yes without guile. Lest at the end of your life, you are consumed with sorrow, and like Eli, your children, your posterity, and others with you are destroyed by God's wrath for your refusal to restrain your children. I will deepen this warning from again the example of Samuel. We heard of what God threatened him, but this threat came after it appeared Samuel had already tried. We read it, 1 Samuel 2, 23 to 24. And he said unto them, why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. And he goes on even to plead with them about sinning against God and not just men and the troubles that will come. And it seems very persuasive and compelling, though they blow it off. And I would note here, God still condemned Eli, saying he did not restrain his sons. What he did was too little, too late. And many parents condemn themselves, not so much by a lack of discipline, but by their very use of it in a way that is inconsistent and incomplete. Parents, half measures in this matter are very likely to ruin your children. For while you say with your mouth and with some of your actions that sin is a great evil, with the rest of your actions you're saying the opposite by tolerating that sin to remain. And I will warn you, children actually despise such inconsistency. And they will use your hypocrisy as an occasion to grow deeper in their own rebellion. Parents, you must follow through. And you must do so despite all your children's protests to the contrary. God says this knowing our hearts. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. It's a strange thing, but you have to learn to harden your hearts against your own children as a way to show the soft heart of love that you have toward them. Despite their pain, even serious pain, in the occasion of serious sin. Proverbs 20, verse 30. The blueness of a wound cleanseth away evil. So do stripes the inward parts of the belly. Your children must obey you. You therefore must require them to be faithful and forbid them to be riotous and unruly. But I'd add here, parents, you must trust God's promises. God gives you with these commands sweet encouragements. Proverbs 20, verse 7. The just man walketh in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. We read from Proverbs 23 that you're to discipline your child with the rod, and by it do what? Save his soul from hell. Genesis 17:17 gives the mother of all these promises. I will be God to thee and to thy seed after thee. Psalm 128. Thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord, his blessings extending to his wife and children. Isaiah 53:14, all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, and great shall be the peace of thy children. Isaiah 44, verses 3-5, that they'll spring up like willows by flowing streams and call upon the name of the Lord. These are wonderful promises that will be fulfilled in the church through our offspring. Baptism itself is a promise, a visible promise of God for you and for your children. And you ought to show your faith in these promises by trusting God while you use all the means that he's appointed, so that, as in Abraham's case, thus, by your holiness and righteous dealing with your family, you're commanding them to follow in the ways of the Lord. Thus, all the things that God has promised shall come to you. And among these means, do not forget prayer, which is, we could say, the chief act of faith. This is why Job prayed day after day, why he sacrificed for his children. He sought their hearts from God, the ruler of their hearts, and so should you. So, your children must obey you, but you must trust God. I've addressed parents now. And third and finally, I address elders most properly to our text. That includes ministers. It includes candidates for eldership as well for the diaconate. Because as we saw from 1 Timothy 3, these things apply by analogy to the other office in the church as well. The first thing this requires is rebuke. What I mean is that elders must rebuke fellow elders for disqualification in this matter, even to the point, if needed, of removal from office. If God removed Eli by such notable judgments, even death, why would we fear enacting a lesser removal just from office? We need to do this, first, without excessive assertion of responsibility. This is something we have to take care of. In Deuteronomy 24, we hear a principle that applies in legal matters, but also in the church. Deuteronomy 24:16, the fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Remember, with Eli, the problem was not directly his children, but that he did not restrain them. That's what Paul assumes when he's speaking of faithful children. That is, insofar as the man has responsibility for their faithfulness, we're talking about his sins, not theirs. The children's sins would then just be evidence in this case of the father's sins, and that's how we need to think. We do not simply remove him from office simply because of children's unbelief and rebellion. That's not what's being taught. We ought to be willing to see blamelessness proven by faithful dealing with unruly children and other children who are not unruly. So, one well-known minister, whose name I'll withhold, had one son who in his adult age fell and was living in sin. This minister showed an evident humility under that trouble. And he would go to different churches when he traveled to preach and constantly appeal for prayer for his lost son. And he'd speak of him as his lost son. He was humble about it and very clear he opposed this boy's rebellion, and he'd done everything he could to remedy it. And God granted those prayers. And now that son is a faithful deacon in the church. It's beautiful. I have no reason to believe that that elder was ever disqualified by his son's unbelief. But contrast another minister I knew who had multiple sons, and though he never discussed it, anyone who knew him knew those sons were wicked. They were proverbial for their riot in unruliness. He never asked for prayer. And when anyone brought it up, he was extremely defensive. I cannot speak with confidence of that man's qualification for the ministry. Do you see the distinction there? If we make an exception, I'd add, it never can be by the man's statement alone, yes, I'm blameless. It has to be with careful inspection by other elders. So we don't excessively assert responsibility, but we also ought to rebuke without respect of persons. We should not spare big steeple preachers, the CEOs of giant parachurch organizations, well-known conference speakers, men notable for usefulness in the church. Are any of them greater than Eli? No. This is a principle that will apply in future sermons under this heading of blamelessness. A neglect to enforce this and other qualifications for the eldership are one great reason the church is in such an evil state today. We cannot mock God who laid down these rules by ignoring them, at least in the case of our big shots, and think that he will bless us. According to 1 Timothy 3:5, if men fail in ruling their house, they will fail in ruling the church. And open your eyes. Have they not failed? Yes, they have. So we resolve, as a rule of our session, and by God's help of any future presbytery, that if God forbid it, this would ever be so among any of us, your elders, that if we do not voluntarily resign ourselves, we will require such a man to be removed from office if these things cannot be properly remedied. So we must rebuke. This calls us, though, not only for rebuke, but those who are by grace qualified must second and finally persevere in those qualifications. The qualifications that bring a man into the office are the same by which he remains in that office. And the word of Christ to ministers in this is, be faithful unto death. This regards first blamelessness with our wives. We could adapt Paul's warning. If a man cannot care for his wife, who's one flesh with him, how can he care for Christ's bride? Failure here will keep a minister from faithfulness in ministry, and it will undermine his authority in caring for the church. I bring a particular warning here to myself and any others about discretion. Our wives, men, are our friends and counselors, but they do not therefore have an immediate right to know all that is happening in the church. A wife cannot handle all her husband's burdens, certainly not all the church's burdens. And people need to be able to confide in their elders and not think it will all be blabbed. So we make a promise, and this is what we practice as your elders. We tell our wives only what they need to know and what we have a duty to tell them. And we ask you help us in this by, when talking to our wives, please not assuming that they know the details of your private pastoral circumstances. They don't unless they needed to or otherwise found out. Even when they do know, we expect them as wise women to be discreet and not reveal the knowledge of private things publicly. Please help them in this. Especially I appeal to other women. Take heed that chatty women not only can, but have ruined whole churches. So blamelessness with our wives, I exhort elders to this. And as well, blamelessness with our children. People of God, we, your elders, resolve to be not only teachers for you, but models for you. We can say and do without guile, "Be ye followers of me, as I am of Christ." It's what Paul says. It's what Paul would have us say. God forbid that we would ever teach only with our lips and not also with our life. Pray that we can ever speak this way, and that what we say will never be unsaid by our lives or the lives of our family. I challenge you, if you see inconsistencies in this or even fear them, please come to us and talk to us. Some have done this, for which I'm thankful. Now you must respect your elders, and you must be patient with our children as we are with yours. But we do not fear admitting that we need the help of the entire church in this most difficult duty of raising the next generation. And this is a matter of the eternal good of our own families, of the whole church, and of our own souls. So finally, in this too, dear people of God, I humbly ask what I appealed to you for on Wednesday night, in the words of 1 Thessalonians 5:25. Brethren, pray for us. Let's stand and pray.